Hi everyone, my name is Natalie and I just read a book that changed my life. I just discovered a new favourite author and she's Australian, which is even better. And I got to buddy read this book with Shawn, which was just the biggest delight. Now the book we're talking about is The Spare Room by Helen Garner. And Shawn and I have decided to do a joint review on this because we just both loved this book so much, and we both want to shout Helen Garner's name from the rooftop because her writing is unbelievable. But we'll get to that. Essentially, this book is about Helen. They say it's autobiographical fiction, but Helen has her friend Nicola come to stay. Now, Nicola is dying of cancer and comes to stay in Helen's spare room in Melbourne to undergo some alternative treatment. Now, Nicola is at the terminal stage of her disease. Shawn and I had a bit of a discussion about where we sit on the spectrum of alternative medicine, even before we started this book, because we just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page, and we are. We just established that he drinks wine while I drink nettle tea. But anyway. But what we discovered that I think we probably jumped the gun with that idea, because the alternative therapy in this book, no matter where you sit on the spectrum, is a rort. It is not real. These doctors are total con men. And what the alternative therapy evolves to represent basically is hope. So one of the first main themes that I got out of this book was the hope that Nicola had. Nicola chose not to just sit down and die. There's a line in the book where she says, if I don't believe in this alternative therapy, then I may as well just lie down and die. So she's choosing to fight. And Nicola is a free spirit. She's lived a very bohemian lifestyle. She's never married. She's never had kids. She lives in some inaccessible beach house on the northern beaches of Sydney. She's a complete... she's just free. Whereas Helen was free, and then she settled down and had her kids. And so she needs to, at every moment, try and convince Nicola to not take this alternative therapy anymore. And that's the kind of second theme that I saw coming through, was the control factor. Helen used the alternative therapy to try and get some control back in a situation where she felt helpless. This book is from Helen's point of view, and so you get a really huge insight into the role of the carer for someone who is caring for a patient who is terminally ill. It was her writing so amazing. You were in those rooms with her. It was so scary and so real. So Helen needed some sort of control because she had no answers to help her friend. So the alternative therapy kind of represented two different main themes for me in the book. The next thing that was really prominent was the friendship aspect. Like I said, Nicola didn't have any family. And so there was all this discussions about how Nicola saw her friends and saw her relationships with the people that she loved in her life. There's a moment where they have a real conversation, and Helen asks her about her friendships, and she said, I never wanted to bore people by telling them how I really felt, and that just crushed me. They also had, big fights. Gosh, they had some big fights, and there were lots of just calm scenes afterwards. And one of the lovely moments was when they were sitting after a big fight and having a cup of tea on the stoop out the back door, and Helen said our relationship was finally open and free. And I remember saying that to Shawn, thinking, oh God, open and free is how we want all of our relationships to be. But it was beautiful. And then it's a book about someone who's dying and them reflecting on their life and not wanting to give up because they haven't done everything they want to. I got out of it the most that Nicola couldn't see what everybody else thought of her. And so she couldn't see herself through other people's eyes. So she had all these things she wanted to do. She had all these relationships she didn't think were real, but they were really important to the people around her. So those are the four main things that I got out of it, as well as just the amazing writing of Helen Garner. I need to read your passage. Please let me do that. This is Helen thinking about death. And she says, "Death will not be denied. To try is grandiose. It drives madness into the soul. It leaches out virtue. It injects poison into friendship and makes a mockery of love." And that's just thrown in there amongst the other hundreds of amazing lines that you get throughout this book. I cannot recommend this book enough. I am going to read everything Helen Garner ever wrote, and I'm going to recommend her to everybody like I'm recommending her to you now. I know that Shawn loved it just as much, so I hope that you enjoy his review, which is on now. And if you do read Helen Garner or have read this book, I would love to chat with you. Okay, thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn. Hey, so here's my review coming soon, but I hadn't actually watched Natalie's review when I filmed mine, nor had I bothered to learn the correct pronunciation of her name. So you're going to hear me refer to her as Natalie, and she has assured me that she answers to anything, but as a Canadian, I would add to that, you can call me anything, but don't call me late for dinner. But anyway, Natalie, I refer to her as Natalie, and we ended up picking one quote that we both loved. I say different things about that quote, and I actually quote a longer version of the same passage. So we have decided to leave both of them in at the risk of repetition. Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with my half of a review of the wonderful novella The Spare Room by Helen Garner. This was a buddy read that I did a couple of weeks ago with Natalie of the wonderful BookTube channel, which you should all check out. Of course, the link will be in the show notes. My Reading Days. And you've heard what she said, and now I'm going to give you my 2 cents worth. I absolutely loved this novella. It was my first by Helen Garner, and I was deeply struck by how, as Natalie told me, but it was quite obvious regardless. It was already quite obvious once I started reading this book that it was based on some pretty autobiographical personal experience, and I was stupefied by the alchemy with which Helen Garner transformed a personal experience into shapely, moving, wonderfully literary fiction. It's really hard to do. At the same time that I was reading this, I was reading some other novels, and I won't digress about them, that were also based on autobiographical experience that read like unreconstructed journal entries. So reading The Spare Room was not only a breath of fresh air, it was an unforgettable reading experience. This portrait of a dying woman and her, I'm going to be judgmental and say her woefully misguided, cockamamie New Age ideas, and the friendship between her and Helen, the narrator, who just happens to share the same first name as the author. That friendship was so beautiful and so true, unvarnished, messy, and beautifully evoked on the page. And I was also really struck by how much this is a story of what are the limits of friendship? What are the limits of being a human trying to help a loved one? As somebody who in my much earlier days struggled with setting appropriate boundaries, I had a bit of a messiah complex. I'm long over that, people. But, I was everybody's best friend, and people are always coming to me for help, and I really related to Helen's struggle in this novel to set appropriate boundaries and come to terms with how much she loved her friend, how much she wanted to help her, and how much she could help her. Powerful. And it didn't read like something self-helpy or something dashed off that was thinly veiled memoir, because I don't like reading those kind of books, that kind of fiction. It really bores me and turns me off. And this was just a thing of emotional power and literary beauty. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So let me close with just some examples of the wonderful writing. For example, this phrase, her hair was as springy as a pot scrubber, and her face was darkly lit by a half smile of ferocious irony. And just the simple power of a sentence like this. Rain fell in the night, quiet and kind. That sentence just got right inside my body, and it's still there. Receiving some particularly disturbing news, the protagonist says, I leaned against the fridge, the lumpy magnets with their lists and reminders pressed into my back. I turned and rearranged them into a rustic pattern. The lemons, the painted roses, the 2 golden bees that Huey loved. This really is the heart of the novel, I think, this passage.
A huge wave of fatigue rinsed me from head to foot. I was afraid I would slide off the bench and measure my length among the cut roses. At the same time, a chain of metallic thoughts went clanking through my mind, like the first dropping of an anchor. Death will not be denied. To try is grandiose. It drives madness into the soul. It leaches out virtue. It injects poison into friendship and makes a mockery of love.
Now that's a bleak passage, and that's one half of the reality of what Helen experiences through being a 24-hour-a-day caregiver to a friend in deep denial over the fact that she's weeks away from dying. But the other half of the story, which balances it so perfectly and so powerfully, is the connection that she sustains and deepens, and the reality and the deeper level of a real reality-based intimacy that she creates, that she co-creates with her friend. It's just amazing. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It was my first Helen Garner novel and not my last, and I just loved it. And what a delight to buddy read it with Natalie. Thanks for watching.